A Harvard dean walks into a struggling public school, but he's not there for the star athlete or the legacy kid. He's asking for Jaden Carter, the quiet black boy his teacher humiliated just weeks before. What happens next leaves the entire school in stunned silence. This isn't just a story of justice, it's a reckoning. And it all begins with one name, whispered in disbelief. If you feel drawn in, make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow we have a story that will leave you speechless. The classroom had long emptied of noise and bodies, but Jaden Carter remained. A thin beam of fading sunlight slipped through the blinds, landing across the pages of his notebook, where the words "Why Harvard Needs Me" stood tall at the top. His pen moved slowly, deliberately, like someone carving a message into stone. He wasn't writing for a grade or applause. He was writing to hold on to something fragile and real: belief. The room smelled faintly of old erasers and floor wax, the ghost of 1,000 mornings. The ceiling buzzed with tired fluorescent lights. He'd learned to find comfort in those little sounds. They meant he still had time. Time before the night shift took his mother and left him alone with the silence again. At 16, Jaden knew more about survival than most kids twice his age. While others worried about prom dates and car keys, he worried about eviction notices, empty fridges, and the soft crack in his mother's voice when she said, "I'm fine." He wasn't supposed to dream this big. Not here. Not in this rust-streaked school with lockers that didn't shut and windows that didn't open. Not in this neighborhood where police sirens were more regular than morning announcements, and certainly not in Mrs. Holloway's class, where expectations for students like him barely rose above "stay quiet and don't cause trouble." But he dreamed anyway. Every night, his mother Evelyn came home from Mercy General smelling of antiseptic and fatigue. Her hospital shoes squeaked softly on their apartment's cracked linoleum floor. Still, she always asked about his day, always kissed his temple, always smiled, even when her back was screaming. She never said it outright, Jaden thought, but she wants this for me, more than I even know. He paused his writing and glanced at the faded photo tucked inside his notebook. A young black man in a Harvard sweatshirt, his father, William Carter, smiling with pride. Jaden didn't remember him well, but he remembered the stories, the brilliance, the promise, and the sudden silence that followed after the accident. That sweatshirt, it was more than cloth. It was memory. It was unfinished legacy. Jaden looked back at his page, rereading the title, "Why Harvard Needs Me." Not the other way around, not "Why I Want Harvard." He meant every word, because he believed institutions like Harvard needed more students who knew what it felt like to be overlooked, who could speak from experience, not just theory, who didn't fit the mold but broke it. From down the hall came the soft squeak of a janitor's mop. Probably Mr. Whitmore again, humming some old jazz tune. He never said much, but he always nodded at Jaden like he saw something others didn't. Jaden didn't know if anyone would ever read his essay. He didn't know if it would matter, but he wrote it anyway. Because sometimes the act of writing it, of daring to put your name next to an impossible dream, was the first real step toward making it possible. The next day, the sky over Westwood High hung low and gray, pressing down like the mood Jaden carried in with him. He walked into advanced English with his usual quiet presence, on time, notebook tucked under one arm, eyes down. He didn't expect much from this class anymore. He just came to listen, do the work, and stay out of trouble. Mrs. Holloway stood at the whiteboard, her back to the students, scribbling college essay themes in tidy, slanted print. Her heels tapped lightly on the linoleum as she turned, her eyes scanning the room with that same thin smile she wore like a mask. "Good morning, everyone," she said, with a brightness that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Today we'll talk about application essays, how to aim high but stay realistic." Jaden took his seat at the far side of the room by the window. He slid his notebook onto his desk, careful not to crinkle the edges. The essay was inside. Mrs. Holloway walked between the rows of desks, sharp-eyed. "Some of you may already have ideas for where you want to apply. That's good. Goals are important. But so is knowing your limits." Her gaze swept the room, then paused, too long, on Jaden. He didn't move, just met her eyes for half a second before looking away. A few rows behind him, Marcus Williams nudged his friend Leon and whispered something. Both boys chuckled. Mrs. Holloway circled back to the front and picked up a stack of papers from her desk. I had a chance to glance at some of your draft titles, and one stood out. She held a single sheet aloft. Why Harvard Needs Me. Her tone was smooth but tinged with disbelief. A low rustle of shifting bodies filled the room. Heads turned, smirks formed. Jaden felt the heat rising in his chest. Harvard, Mrs. Holloway repeated, drawing out the syllables like a punchline. Now that is ambitious. She didn't say his name, but everyone knew. Marcus let out a stage-whispered, "He better be applying as a janitor." Snickers followed. Leon chimed in with a grin. "Yeah, maybe they're recruiting mop specialists this year." More laughter. Not everyone joined in, but no one stopped it either. Jaden sat motionless, eyes locked on the page in front of him. He didn't flinch, didn't raise his voice. He'd learned long ago how to hold pain without spilling it. Mrs. Holloway tapped the paper against the desk, feigning civility. "Jaden, dreaming big is fine, but we must also be mindful of practicality. Harvard looks for a certain pedigree." Pedigree, like he was a dog from the wrong litter. He spoke softly, barely above a whisper. "It's just an essay, ma'am." "And essays reflect mindset," she replied quickly. "If you reach too far, you set yourself up for disappointment. A strong community college application might serve you better." He nodded once, slowly. "Thank you for the advice." The words were polite, but hollow. He wasn't thanking her. He was letting her finish. More silence. Mrs. Holloway moved on, never acknowledging the quiet cruelty hanging in the air. Jaden stayed after class, not because he wanted to, but because leaving too fast would feel like retreat. As the room emptied, Mr. Whitmore passed by the open door, pushing his mop cart. He paused just for a second and met Jaden's eyes. A small nod. No words. Just a nod. Someone had seen. Jaden gathered his things with care, folding the essay and tucking it into his backpack like something sacred. As he walked out, he heard Marcus's voice drifting from down the hall. "Harvard! Man, get real!" But Jaden didn't turn around, didn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, he walked down the corridor, past the rows of lockers that never quite closed, past the scuffed trophy case holding medals from 10 years ago, past the peeling posters announcing a college fair he couldn't attend because his mom's shift overlapped. He kept walking until he was outside, the cold air clearing the sting from his eyes. Then he stopped. Just outside the side exit, near the dumpsters where the janitors sometimes took their smoke breaks, Jaden stood alone and finally let his shoulders drop. It wasn't just humiliation, it was the reminder that to some people, no matter how well he spoke, no matter how hard he worked, he'd always be too much of something and not enough of everything else. But standing there in the cold, a different thought crept in. What if they're wrong? He exhaled slowly and took out the essay again. The edges were still smooth. The ink was still bold. The words were still his. He read the title one more time. Why Harvard Needs Me. Then he put it back in his bag, squared his shoulders, and walked toward the bus stop. Not faster, not slower. Exactly as he intended. That night, Jaden sat at the kitchen table long after the world outside had gone to sleep. The apartment was quiet, too quiet, but he was used to that. His mother was working a double shift again. The ticking clock above the fridge kept time like it had a secret to tell. In front of him lay his essay, now rewritten from memory. Word for word, as best as he could recall. The original had vanished, deleted from the school printer, and somehow, conveniently, fragments of it had ended up in the shared folder labeled Jaden's Sources. The accusation of plagiarism hadn't come yet, but he felt it brewing. He saw the way Mrs. Holloway eyed him in class, her gaze like a slow-burning fuse. He wasn't sure how it happened. Maybe someone saw him printing. Maybe someone wanted to make sure he knew his place. He didn't need proof to know it had been Marcus. Still, he didn't yell, didn't beg, didn't report anyone. Instead, he sat here, copy of Elements of Argument, borrowed from the library beside him, a mug of cheap instant coffee cooling by his elbow, and his fingers moving steadily across the page. He wrote quietly, slowly, patiently. It wasn't about speed, it was about claiming back what was his. 3 nights later, just after 7 p.m., Jaden sat cross-legged on the living room floor, laptop balanced on a pillow. The only light came from the desk lamp in the corner and the street lamp outside, casting a gold haze through the window blinds. His mother's voice echoed from the hallway as she came in, sounding tired but steady. "How's it coming?" she asked, setting down her bag. Jaden hesitated, then offered a half smile. "Version 3, but it's stronger now." She nodded, opened the fridge to grab a bottle of water, and looked at him like she was about to say something, but didn't. He knew that look. It was the same one she wore when the bills didn't add up, or when she walked past the old photo of his father in the hallway. A look that carried weight she wasn't ready to unload. So he let it be. At school, things were quieter. Not better, just quieter. The snickers from Marcus and Leon had faded into occasional glares. Mrs. Holloway's tone remained clipped, but calculated, like she knew something, but wasn't sure if she had the power to act on it yet. Jaden kept his head down, spoke only when called on, watched everything. It was on one of those gray Tuesday mornings that Mr. Whitmore found him sitting alone on the back steps during lunch. "Shouldn't be wasting your break out here," the old janitor said, mop handle resting on one shoulder. Jaden shrugged. "Cafeteria's not exactly my spot." Mr. Whitmore nodded, as if he understood more than he let on. For a moment, they just sat in silence, broken only by the distant echo of slamming lockers. Then the old man said, "You ever read Baldwin?" Jaden blinked. "James Baldwin?" "That's the one." Jaden hesitated. "Just some quotes. Never a full book." Mr. Whitmore scratched his beard. "Start with the fire next time. Don't read it fast. Let it sit with you." Jaden nodded. "Okay." They didn't talk about the essay, or the tension, or the way Jaden had been slowly erased by the people meant to guide him. But something passed between them anyway, a recognition. Later that week, Jaden found a worn copy of The Fire Next Time tucked between the library return bin and his usual table. No note, no name, but he knew. As he read it that night, his world shifted. Baldwin didn't write with answers. He wrote with fire, challenging, grieving, hoping. Jaden read and reread one passage that clung to his ribs. "The world is before you, and you need not take it or leave it as it was when you came in." He closed the book and let those words live inside him. One afternoon, walking past the main hallway, Jaden spotted Mr. Whitmore carefully polishing the trophy case. "Why do you stay here?" Jaden asked suddenly. Mr. Whitmore paused, straightened slowly, and looked at him. "Because sometimes the soil that grows you needs watering too." Jaden didn't answer. He just nodded and kept walking, a little straighter than before. That weekend, while Evelyn worked another overnight shift, Jaden stayed up late writing, not just one essay, but 3. Different angles, different approaches. He was experimenting now, sharpening his tools. He practiced reading them aloud, recording himself on an old phone. He cringed at the sound of his own voice, but he kept doing it anyway. He looked up Harvard's essay prompts, then Yale's, then Princeton's. Not because he thought he'd get into all of them, but because no one had ever told him he couldn't, except the people who'd never really seen him. Sometimes he still heard Marcus's voice in his head, still saw Mrs. Holloway's smirk. But those memories no longer stung the way they used to. Now they became fuel, proof that he was hitting a nerve, that maybe, just maybe, he was meant to. One night, after rewriting his essay for what felt like the 10th time, Jaden opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out the old photo again. The one of his father in the Harvard sweatshirt. He studied the man's eyes, the calm in them, the pride, the silent dare to do something extraordinary. "I'm trying, Dad," he whispered. He put the photo beside his laptop and opened a new document. At the top of the page, he typed the same title again. "Why Harvard Needs Me." And this time, he didn't hesitate. Monday morning arrived like any other, ordinary and different. The school hallways buzzed with the same half-hearted energy, sneakers squeaking on tile, lockers slamming in lazy rhythm. Jaden walked through it all as he always did, quiet, unnoticed by most, unbothered by the few who still whispered behind his back. He moved through the building like someone who'd learned to make himself small, but never invisible. When the announcement came over the intercom just after second period, it was short and simple. Jaden Carter, please report to the principal's office immediately. No explanation. No tone of trouble. Just neutral airwaves and static. Still heads turned. Mrs. Holloway paused mid-sentence, marker frozen above the whiteboard. Her eyes flicked toward Jaden, then quickly away, already writing a story in her mind. Whispers rose like smoke. Again? Maybe they finally caught him. Probably about that Harvard thing. Jaden said nothing. He gathered his notebook, tucked it under his arm, and rose with the same quiet grace he always carried. No excuses, no hurry, just purpose. He walked to the door. Bring your thing, Mrs. Holloway added, her voice clipped. You may not return to class. The hallway to the administrative wing felt longer than usual. Each footstep echoed slightly, as if the walls themselves were paying attention for once. When Jaden reached the office, the receptionist gestured without a word. The door to Principal Grant's office was already ajar. He knocked lightly. Come in, came the principal's voice. Jaden stepped through and froze. Two men were standing inside. One was Principal Grant, looking unusually alert, even deferential. The other man was older, tall, well-dressed in a dark charcoal suit and polished shoes that probably cost more than Jaden's rent. His presence filled the room, not with volume, but with gravity. Jaden, Principal Grant said, I'd like you to meet Dean Malcolm Rivers from Harvard University. The name dropped like a pin into still water. Dean Rivers extended a hand with a measured smile. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. Jaden blinked. Sir, thank you. He shook the hand, steady despite the swirl of thoughts in his chest. Dean Rivers gestured to the chair across from him. Please sit. Jaden sat, shoulders square, breath even. The dean continued. I was at the Mallister competition. I watched your presentation. But more than that, I've been reading your work. Not just the final version, but the earlier ones too. Jaden's eyebrows lifted slightly. You've seen my drafts? The dean smiled. You have an advocate, a quiet one, but persistent. Jaden didn't have to ask. He already knew. Mr. Whitmore, Dean Rivers continued. We'll discuss the formalities later. For now, I'd just like to speak with your English teacher briefly before I go. Would you mind waiting here? Jaden nodded. Of course. The dean rose, adjusted his jacket, and left the office. Down the hall, advanced English was still in session. Mrs. Holloway stood by the window, gesturing toward the board as she spoke about realistic tone in college admissions. She didn't see the door open, but the room did. The class fell silent as the tall man in the dark suit entered, the door closing softly behind him. Mrs. Holloway turned, confused. Can I help you? Dean Rivers stepped forward, calm, composed. I'm looking for Jaden Carter's teacher. Her throat caught. That would be me. A beat of silence stretched between them. I'm Dean Malcolm Rivers, he said, from Harvard. The name dropped heavier here. Every student sat straighter. Mrs. Holloway's face flickered, shock, then confusion, then the struggle to smooth it all into something professional. Of course, yes, Jaden is one of my students. Dean Rivers gave a polite, unreadable nod. I wanted to thank you, he said. It's rare to meet a student who writes with such clarity of purpose, even rarer to see such strength, in spite of obstacles. His gaze held hers just a second too long. Her smile faltered. If you'll excuse me, he said. Then he turned and left. No accusation, no lecture, just presence, just truth, quietly delivered. Back in the front office, Jaden waited in the chair by the window, watching sunlight stretch slowly across the linoleum. When Dean Rivers returned, he nodded once to Principal Grant, then looked to Jaden. I'll be in touch soon, he said, but I want you to know something. Jaden stood. You belong, the dean said softly, not because of charity, not because of luck, because you've earned your place. Jaden didn't smile, but his eyes held steady, like something inside him had finally been confirmed. Thank you, sir. Dean Rivers offered his hand once more. This time, Jaden gripped it with quiet certainty. Spring returned slowly to Westwood. The trees along the school's walkway had begun to bloom, their branches delicate with soft white flowers that seemed to whisper, "You made it through the winter." Inside the auditorium, families filled the rows in quiet anticipation. There were no balloons, no loud music, just a sense of respect in the air, as if something deeper than celebration was about to unfold. At the center of the stage stood a simple podium, and beside it, a framed photograph of William Carter. His smile beamed from within a Harvard lab coat, young, determined, full of unfinished dreams. Principal Grant stepped forward, his voice steady. "Today, we don't just honor achievement, we honor resilience. This year, through the support of Harvard University and in recognition of William Carter's legacy, Westwood High will launch the Carter Scholars Program, a scholarship for students who show not only academic promise, but strength of spirit in the face of adversity." In the front row, Evelyn Carter sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, her hospital ID still clipped to her pocket. Just visible, just enough. Her eyes glistened. It wasn't pride exactly. It was peace. Jaden stepped onto the stage not with swagger, but with a calm that came from knowing he had nothing to prove anymore. His speech was short. He didn't speak about revenge. He didn't speak about the ones who tried to stop him. Instead, he spoke about the ones who lifted him up. "My mother gave up her future," he said, "so I could have one. A man with a mop showed me the power of quiet wisdom. And when I almost lost my voice, I found it again in the very room that tried to silence me." He paused, looking out at his classmates, teachers, strangers, friends. We think legacy is something passed down in blood or money, but it isn't. Legacy is what you build in the dark, when no one's looking. It's what you leave behind when you choose courage over comfort. There was no thunderous applause, just a silence that settled over the room like light on water. Later, as the crowd slowly dispersed, Evelyn touched the corner of her son's suit jacket and whispered, "Your father would have cried today." Jaden smiled. "I know." Behind the stage, Mr. Whitmore waited with a small paper-wrapped box in his hands. "It's yours now," he said. Inside was the worn Harvard sweatshirt William had worn the day Jaden was born. As Jaden held it to his chest, his voice was soft. "I didn't come here to prove I was good enough," he said. "I came to show what was always there." Then he folded the sweatshirt carefully, like something sacred, and tucked it beneath his arm. Before he left the stage, he turned back one last time, looking out at the empty seats, the dim lights, the blooming trees just beyond the window. And he said quietly to no one in particular, "The dream was never about where I ended up. It was about becoming the kind of person who belonged there all along." Some stories aren't just told, they're felt. Jaden's journey reminds us that dignity doesn't shout, it endures. It walks quietly through injustice. It rewrites the narrative from the inside out. Too often, people judge based on appearance, status, or zip code, forgetting that the human spirit can rise from the humblest of places. But when a black man like Jaden speaks with quiet conviction, when a janitor turns out to be a scholar, when a mother gives everything to pass on hope, those are the moments that change everything. These are not just emotional stories. They are incredible stories, touching stories, the kind that belong in every home and every heart. This is the soul of narrated stories. This is what we mean when we say unraveled fates. If you were moved by this story, take a moment to share it. Someone out there needs to hear it, and maybe, just maybe, they'll begin to believe their voice matters too.